Joining us now, Lester Spence, Associate Professor of Political Science at Johns Hopkins University, Skyping in from Baltimore. Lester, we welcome you to America's Forum.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. Professor, you had this to say in a recent interview with NPR, quote, "I am so tired and frustrated, and I know America's a better place than it was, but this continues to happen, and we've got a black guy as the president? You've got to be kidding me," close quote. You want to expound on those comments, Lester?
Yeah. So usually when we're examining kind of life chances in America, we can cut them a number of different. Cut them by income, for example. We can compare the life chances of somebody who makes a certain amount of money versus the life chances of somebody who makes less than that amount. We can compare by gender, by occupation. A number of times we compare it by race, and we say, okay, how do black populations, for example, what are their life chances compared to those of their non-black counterparts, right? And we find that usually on any indicator we can think of, usually those life chances are poor. So the quality of life for African Americans is worse than the quality of life for people who aren't African American. And it doesn't matter whether you're talking about whether you add class or gender to that, particularly when we talk about instances like this, instances of police violence against black bodies. So we've been focused on the Michael Brown case, and Michael Brown is a working class to poor African American, but we could have easily looked at the case of a black journalist who was killed in San Bernardino, I believe 2 or 3 weeks ago. He was just biking. Police mistook him for a burglar, and in the process of apprehending him, they killed him, right? And this was just a middle-class African American. It's when this stuff continues to happen that people of a range of different backgrounds become incredibly frustrated.
Lester, when we take a look electorally, I'll never forget in the wake of President Obama's election, one of my old pollsters, as I'm a recovering congressman, he took a look at the president's approval numbers within the African American community right after the president's first inaugural address. And he said, and boy, I said, "Oh man, you better watch this, you're going to get struck by lightning." He took somewhat of an irreverent look at it. He said, the president right now, and this is January of 2009, he said President Obama's numbers in the African American community approach 99% approval. And he went on to say, I don't know if the good Lord himself would have the same kind of numbers in a Baptist Sunday school. So you had that understandable affinity and eagerness to see the president succeed, and the near unanimous backing of the African American community. There have been some changes. Compare and contrast right now. The CBS New York Times poll just taken, 41% of Americans say they are satisfied with President Obama's response to Ferguson, while 34% said they were dissatisfied. Still, when you couple that with the number of people who are undecided, 41% is a minority, and it includes a variety of folks across the political spectrum, including you. What can the president do, or at this point in his term, is it too late?
So first of all, I think it's important to kind of distinguish between criticisms, right? So there are some people who, well, I don't have a lot of time. What I'll do is, what can he do? So the president, there are a few powers that the president wields, even when he's in a context in which he has a Congress that basically is oppositional, right? So the most important powers he has are the power of the executive order and the power of the bully pulpit, the power of presidential rhetoric, right? Now, what he can do, right, is he can be more effective in the use of his rhetoric. So what we see in the Ferguson case is whenever, in the times he's spoken, he's kind of created a symmetrical relationship between violence committed by protesters, which actually hasn't been a lot, either absolutely or in comparison to previous disturbances, whether you're talking about LA in 92 or 93, whether you're talking about Detroit, one of the cities in the 60s, whether you're talking about Miami in the 80s, right? He's making a kind of a symmetrical comparison between violence and then police violence. that is state violence committed against citizens, against journalists, the violent act committed against Michael Brown, the violent action committed against political representatives, right? He can stop that, right? He can stop that in a way that does not necessarily bias the case against Darren Wilson if a case is brought up. He can do that. Well, the other thing he can do is he can use the power of the executive order to begin to deal with these issues that continually raise themselves up, even though we're talking about local government. There are at least a couple of occasions when the president has actually tried to intervene in state government policy. So we know he has the opportunity to. It's just about whether he wants to be audacious enough to do so.
Let me ask you this, Lester. There's something else. It's just, you talked about the bully pulpit. It's the presence of the president. Should he have attended today's memorial service?
That's an excellent question. That's a really, really excellent question. A number of people would say he does, even though I have been an Obama critic almost since he's been elected. I can understand those who say he should be there, but for me, I think that actually would kind of bias the case. I don't want anything to prevent. I believe that Darren Wilson murdered Michael Brown. I believe that. Granted, I'm not there. I don't have all of the information, yada, yada. But I believe he murdered Michael Brown.
And you're offering that opinion, and I don't know if any would be.
I'm offering that as an opinion.
Right.
The thing is what we need is for that case to be as fair as possible.
And if the president showed up, that might prejudice the jury pool.
That might prejudice the jury pool.
All right, fair enough. Lester Spence,
that he could use rhetoric more effectively. I don't know if I necessarily want him there.
All right, Lester Spence, I appreciate your perspective on this important question. We look forward to visiting with you again. Thanks for Skyping in from Johns Hopkins.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Let's change gears now. Look back on a great moment in American history, the first manned mission to the moon, the voyage of Apollo 11, the subject of this American moment.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth.
In 1961, newly elected President John Fitzgerald Kennedy announced to the Congress and to all of mankind America's intention to send man to the moon. Previously restricted to the realm of science fiction, the president's commitment set in motion an unprecedented effort to fulfill one of man's oldest dreams. The obstacles were monumental, not the least of which was to create an energy source capable of sending a manned spacecraft to the moon. The answer stood 363 feet tall and delivered 8 million pounds of thrust, making the Saturn V the most powerful rocket ever built. On July 20th, 1969, Apollo 11, carrying astronauts Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, and Edwin Buzz Aldrin, circled the moon until Armstrong and Aldrin entered the lunar module and readied themselves for their historic landing. With just 20 seconds of fuel left, disaster was narrowly averted when Armstrong had to manually fly the Eagle away from unexpected boulders to a smoother and less dangerous landing zone. Although the imagery was poor, Neil Armstrong's words came through loud and clear.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
However, the flight was not without controversy. Buzz Aldrin, a devout Christian, administered himself communion on the moon. Since NASA was already fighting a lawsuit from atheist Madalyn Murray O'Hair, who objected to the earlier Apollo 8 crew reading from the book of Genesis, Aldrin's communion was kept a secret from the public. Not so secret was the plaque bolted to the descent ladder on the lunar module. It was left on the moon to greet future visitors and reads, "We came in peace for all mankind." For Newsmax TV, I'm Bill Curtis, and this is an American Moment.